In this video, I'm going to show you how to basically create a file as a part of tests. In this particular video, I'm using Java, but this will work in any of the programming languages. I'm also in this particular video using the background service code as a part of Java. And again, it's not specific to the background service. This approach will work with virtually any code base that is going to be using a file. So this is universal. In order to get this working, to get this set up, there's a couple things I need to do to get the test ready to go. So you're welcome to follow along in this code. This is the background service, either add new or test existing functionality. What we'll do is we'll start off in the test file. And let's go ahead and format this up. This is not specific to the file side of things. I just want to set this up so that we're able to get to the file part of it very quickly. So let's just clean up a few things real fast. We don't need these comments. We'll format everything. That looks good. Let's go ahead and change this. So this is transaction loading. So I'll call this transaction, no caps lock, loading test. Yes. Transaction loading. We'll say this is successful. All right, so let's just run this, make sure this is good. So that's good. The other part of this, again, this is not specific to the file side of things. I do need to make sure that my main is going to run because it's a background service. Everything is basically happening in the load transactions. So this is the thing under test. This is a part of the main method. So we can simply call main. So we'll say app.main. We'll pass null for now. That is probably going to throw an exception. Yep. So we've got a throws declaration. Now I also want to be able to stop this. So let's do, let's say, what do we want to do? Let's assert equals. So we'll change this to star. Assert equals true. App.get is running. It should be running. And then we'll say app.stop. And then assert equals. Yeah, false. That looks good. So we need to set these up. Public static get is running. That looks right. We'll also need stop. Public static void stop. Should be running as false. Okay, that looks good. All right, let me just make sure this is running. So app.main is throwing an exception. Okay, so if you do get this exception, say no suitable driver found, likely I did not fix the POM file. What you'll need to do is add a dependency for Postgres or whatever the database driver is. This one happens to be Postgres. So let me go and grab that really fast. Paste that in, save that, synchronize the class path, run it again, and we should get a connection error. Yes, all right, perfect. So we're set up now, we're ready to start on the file side of things. This is all set up to just get everything working so that I've got a test ready to go. We haven't done anything specific to the files. So the files, what we need to do, first off, I'm gonna use test-driven development to identify what to change. So I've got this connection failed exception. This is kind of my anchor point. So this is a good exception in this case because that's gonna tell me when I'm done with the file. This particular exercise, looking at what's happening with the transaction loader, loading transactions, it first reads the transactions from the file. Then it tries to save those to the database. So it's getting through the read transactions, no problem. Then it's trying to connect to the database. So that's good. That means that I need to figure out how to make it fail on reading transactions. So why is it not failing on reading transactions? Well, it has this if file path exists. And since the file does not exist because it can't reach the file where we're trying to read the data, then it simply ignores this and returns empty transactions. And there's clearly no guard clause that says, hey, don't do anything in that particular case. So this is good. This basically tells me I'm on the right path. So what I need to do now is I effectively need to set up my test where we are going to use a directory path. So let's start with that. I'm going to pick a directory path. There's a couple different ways we could do this. One is we could use a path that's something like on my hard drive, use temp, and then maybe a test data folder or something like that. So that could be one way to go. That's at the root, and then everybody just needs to know. I don't particularly like that. It's useful from time to time, but I don't like absolute paths like that because it's kind of a hidden folder that nobody really knows about. I'd rather it be inside this folder, but then the problem there comes in. I need to make sure it's not checked into version control. So let's talk through that really fast. First off, we will get a directory. Let's go ahead and create the directory. So we'll say path test data directory equals, and I could just put this in here, but I'm going to put this in a method so I can use it in other tests later on. So get test data directory. We are going to need path, so let's import that. And let's go ahead and create our methods. Private static, this is going to return a path. Get test data directory. So this is going to return paths.get, and what we're going to do, so what I want to do here is I want to create a folder at the root for the data loader app. I want to create a folder here called test data. So that'll be inside the source so I can see it right here, and then we'll figure out how to remove that from source control. So we'll say by default, this is going to run in the folder of the project that contains the test folder. That's just how Java works. Every language is a little bit different. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to guess on what we think it is. So I'll say back a folder and then test data. So that's what I think it is. And we need an import. And then we'll say to absolute path, and let's normalize that. So we'll return that out. And what I want to do now is I'm going to set a breakpoint and see what test data directory is, see if it's the path I want. And actually, since I know this works, let me do something that's not what I want. So we'll just say the test data folder so we can see how this works. So let's right click, I'll debug the test. So here's our test data directory. Now here it's kind of hard to see, it cuts it off. So let's go to the locals test data directory, view that. There we go. So we'll notice that we are in the data loader app main folder, and then the service app folder, and then test data. So this is creating test data in the service app folder, which is this project here. And that's not where I want it. I want it up a level. So now that I know where it's resolving, let's do back a level. We'll debug this again. And now it's the test data folder underneath data loader app. That's exactly where I want that. So again, you have to figure out where you want it, play with this a little bit, use the debugging to see what the value is of that variable, see what it looks like. But that's the idea for figuring out how to create that folder path where you want it. So it's going to create it where I want it. So that's exactly what we want. So the other thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to need to create the file as well as the folder, and then exclude it from version control. So let's work through that really fast. So from here, now that I've got this, let's set this up. So we'll say write, and let's look and see what we're doing. We're writing, okay, so it's a txns.dat file is the file for which it's looking in that folder. So we'll say write txns.dat file to test data directory, and we'll say get example file content. So again, I'm going to create a helper method that's going to get me the file contents, but that way the method could be used in other tests later on. So I'm just thinking ahead in terms of how I want to set this up. It's also keeping my test method fairly clean, so I don't have several lines of code just for setting things up. I can keep things a little cleaner in terms of my test method. All right, so that's going to write that out. So let's start with get example file contents. And that's not exactly the format we're going to look for. So we'll say example file contents, and let's look back and see what we've got. So reading these transactions. These are, okay, so the account ID is a UUID. It was trying to do an int, reference amount, and double. So let's go back. So we'll say UUID, reference amount, and then memo. Memo for string, double amount. Yep, there we go. So let's return. Now it's helping me out. That looks better. So UUID, reference, amount, and memo. Learn how to use the AI tools. They will make your life a lot easier. All right, so there's the example file contents. Now we need to write the transactions data. Write it static, void. Write transactions data file. Let's clear out most of this. I don't think that's quite what we're looking for. So all we really need to do here is, the first thing you need to do is make sure the folder path exists. So we'll say files dot create directories directory. Exactly. So this will make sure that that folder exists. Once that's done, then we can write that out. So we'll say files dot write to, we'll say paths dot get directory to string with txns.dat. So we're going to take the file, the folder path, combine it with the file name, and then we'll get the content. So that should create the file for us. If we did everything right, knowing that we have a problem with the exception, the database exception, my hope is we have a new problem, which is on the decryption side of things. This particular project does a decryption. So let's run this really fast. Let's see what happens. You'll notice test data folder, there it is. It created the txns.dat file, so it did indeed create that. All right, so we do have a problem. Oh, I know what the other problem is. So it's still getting a database exception problem because it's not reading from that file. With the last thing we have to do on this is we have to tell the code to read from our file instead of where it was normally reading. In this particular case, you'll have to look and see where it is. In this particular case, it's in the transaction loader configuration file. Here is the folder path. So we need to override this folder path. So what we're going to do is inside the test, we're going to set that up, and then we're going to undo it when we're done. So we'll say transaction loader. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create an override value. Instead of changing anything here, I'm going to set an override value. So we'll go to the transaction class and we'll say set source directory override. And that'll be from our test data directory.toString. And then we will try as we might. And then finally, nope. Let's go into those. So finally, we'll go back to the transaction loader and say reset source directory override. I just noticed I have a misspelling. Fix that now. All right, so we're setting up an override, and then when we're done with everything, we'll reset that override. So let's set those up now. We'll create new method, public static void set source directory override. This is going to be a new static field. That's exactly right. So let's create that really fast. So we'll say private static string source directory override. We don't need to initialize it to null. That will happen automatically. And then we will need to reset it. That's exactly right. So that will set everything up there. The last thing we need to do is we need to use this value. So we've set it up to be able to use it, but we're not using it. In fact, Java is even helping us out. It's saying you're never reading from this value. There's no point in having it. So let's go and use that now. There are other languages will have coalescing operators or propagating operators. What we're going to do here is a simple ternary for Java. We'll say if that exists, then use that value. Otherwise, it's not equal to null. Otherwise, use what's there. So if source directory is not null, use source directory override. Otherwise, use what was already there. Now let's head back to our test. We get an error really, really quickly into this one. So at this point, we're largely done with everything for most files. In this particular case, we have to deal with encrypted files. So I'll take that one more step. But before I get there, one more thing that you're going to want to do, because I've created this test data and the transactions data file locally in the source control, I want to make sure that that is excluded from source control when I check it in. So let me navigate back to our files. So here we are inside this folder. If I go up one, here's get ignore. I'm going to open this get ignore file. And you can put this anywhere. I'm just going to put it at the bottom. And let me show what the difference is. Looking at source control, you'll notice txns.dat is included in the files. What I'm going to do is say ignore the test data folder anywhere. Now, txns.dat is excluded. The get ignore, it picked up that there's a change there. So that's now excluded from source control. And then again, when I go back to my main, you'll notice that test data is now grayed out, which means it will no longer be checked into version control. So I'm going to sum that up really fast, and then I'll just finish up the encrypted side of things, which is not part of this video, but just so you can see what that looks like. What we did, what we set up, starting off with the test side of things, we set up our folder path, our folder directory. You can set this up wherever you'd like. I chose to do this inside the source control structure, inside the project structure. So I've created that path. Then when we create the file, we're creating both the directory that contains it, otherwise we're going to get an error, as well as the file itself. Then we need to set the path so that it uses it as a part of the production code. You have to find where that file is going to get read. So again, going back to the transaction loader file, you'll notice that it's pulling from the configuration source directory and the txns.dat file in that. So the source directory is in the transaction loader configuration class, and that's exactly right here. So now that we know where to set that up, we can now inside our test, we can say set up a different path, and then when you're done, undo that. Going back in, all we're doing is holding on to that into a new field, source directory override, right up here. We're holding on to it and resetting it as we need to, and then we simply use that. So that's the basic structure of dealing with files whenever you need to create a file and point something over. We did make a couple of changes to the production code, not a lot, hopefully minimal changes. Sometimes you do have to make some changes to production code, but we've minimized the amount of changes we need to do just to be able to get this thing to work so that we can pass it a data file and move on. So again, in most applications where you're not dealing with encryption, this should be everything you need to do. Now that that's all done, I'm going to, actually, sorry, one more thing that you do need to do is the get ignore. So don't forget that get ignore because it's in the folder structure. Now that all that's done, let me go ahead and finish this up so you can see the encryption side of things. So if you're curious about how that works, I'll go ahead and finish that really quickly. So the encryption we're going to do all inside here. Effectively what we're doing is we're going to reverse what we're doing with the cipher. So most of these lines are actually going to be the same thing. I'm going to copy these over, paste that in, and instead of decrypt mode, it's encrypt mode. Then I need to reverse. So what I was doing was base 64 encoding, doing the encryption, and then writing out to the bytes, or writing the bytes out straight out. So I'm going to do the reverse of that. So what we'll do is we'll say byte decrypted bytes is the content get bytes. So that's from the contents coming up. Then our encrypted bytes is the encryption, so we're going the encryption instead of the decryption. And then finally, again, we're just reversing, the base 64 is, we'll use the base 64 encoder, and there we go. Here we just change this to base 64 encoded bytes, which are bytes. I don't need to call get bytes. The other thing is here, this is needing the decryption key. So there's a few different ways to do this. I could just load up a configuration loader. So we'll say transaction configuration loader.load, and then get the decryption key from that. So there's what that code looks like. So again, these first 4 lines basically came directly in. These next 3 lines are the reverse of what we were doing before. So before we were base 64 encoding and then encrypting. Here we're encrypting and then base 64 encoding. So it's just the opposite of those. And then finally write that out. If all of this works, I should get the database exception again. And I do. So that database exception says it's reading those records. Let's confirm that. So load transactions. Let's do a breakpoint here. Let's see if the transactions are loaded. Transactions, there's 3 records. They are indeed decrypted. So we can now see the values that are coming back out of it. So again, this last little bit was just encryption. It wasn't part of the file itself, but hopefully that's helpful.